Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today we're not talking about business or success stories. We're simply following James, Tu Diep, and little Ly on a quiet family picnic by a small stream. No pressure, no rush, just ordinary moments that slowly reveal what real happiness looks like. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys aren't about going far, but about sitting close to the people you love and letting life slow down. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next videos. The stream traced a quiet path between clusters of low-growing bushes and weathered stones, its current moving with the kind of patience that suggested it had long ago stopped competing with the world's urgency. Everything here seemed to exist at a different tempo, slower, more deliberate, as though the place itself was extending an invitation to anyone who arrived. Leave your hurry at the edge of these trees. James walked several paces ahead, a wicker basket balanced in the crook of his arm. The contents had been arranged that morning with visible care, nothing carelessly tossed in, nothing forgotten. It was the sort of basket that revealed something about its owner before a word was spoken, methodical, considerate, unrushed. He wasn't one for filling silence with idle talk. His communication came through other channels, the way he moved, the attention he paid to small details, the glances he cast over his shoulder every dozen steps or so. These backward looks weren't born from anxiety or impatience. They were simply habit, a quiet ritual. He needed to see that Tu Diep and little Ly were still there, still keeping pace, still part of the same moment he was moving through. The gesture carried more weight than any verbal check-in could. Behind him, Tu Diep held Ly's hand with a grip that managed to be both secure and gentle. As they navigated the uneven ground, she murmured reminders about watching for slick stones and hidden roots. Her voice had a quality that made warnings sound like comfort, calm, measured, instinctively protective. Ly, by contrast, was a bundle of barely contained energy. She talked in an endless, looping stream about yesterday's trip to the market, where she'd seen an enormous fish with silver scales, then pivoted without pause to announce that today she was absolutely going to catch something bigger than Uncle James ever had. Her enthusiasm bounced off the quiet landscape, adding brightness to the stillness. When they finally reached a suitable spot along the stream's edge, James lowered the basket with deliberate care. Before settling in, he crouched down to examine the ground, brushing away loose pebbles and testing the earth's stability with his palm. Only after this assessment did he unfold the mat, smoothing out every wrinkle with slow, attentive strokes. Each movement reflected the same philosophy he applied to everything else in his life. Build from the foundation up, attend to the details, never sacrifice quality for speed. Tu Diep began unpacking the basket, retrieving pieces of fruit and peeling them with practiced efficiency. She arranged the slices on a small plate in neat rows before passing them one by one to Ly, pausing between offerings to wipe the girl's sticky fingers with a damp cloth. These small acts of care flowed from her without conscious thought. They had become reflex, woven into the fabric of how she moved through the world. Ly accepted each piece while her attention remained fixed on the stream. Every few moments, she would dart forward to collect a particularly smooth stone, holding it up for James's inspection as though she'd discovered buried treasure. James met each presentation with genuine interest. He examined every stone Ly brought him, turning it over in his palm, commenting on its color or shape. He never dismissed her finds as trivial or hurried her along to more important matters. To him, what mattered was that they mattered to her. When it came time to prepare for fishing, James reached for the smaller rod without hesitation. He began assembling Ly's equipment first, working through each step with unhurried precision, tying the line, adjusting the hook's position, checking the reel's tension. As he worked, he explained what he was doing in simple, clear language. This wasn't a rushed tutorial. He wanted understanding, not just obedience. He wanted her to grasp not only the how, but the why. His voice remained steady throughout, patient in a way that suggested he had all the time in the world. Tu Diep stood a few feet away, watching the lesson unfold. She made no move to insert herself into their exchange. A small smile formed at the corners of her mouth, subtle, almost private, but carrying depths of feeling that words would have flattened. In her eyes was something she hadn't experienced often during the more demanding seasons of her life, a sense of genuine, uncomplicated peace. She recognized these moments for what they were, rare and valuable, worth protecting. When the fishing lines finally entered the water, the three of them settled into a comfortable formation along the bank. Time seemed to lose its usual grip here. James kept his gaze trained on the water's surface, occasionally pointing out subtle ripples to Ly and offering theories about why the fish weren't biting yet. Ly listened with exaggerated seriousness, nodding as though absorbing profound wisdom, before asking another innocent question that drew a soft laugh from James. Tu Diep sat with her hands loosely folded in her lap, letting herself simply be present. She listened to the layered sounds around them, the stream's constant murmur, the gentle back and forth between James and Ly, the occasional rustle of leaves overhead, the usual noise that filled her days. The demands, the decisions, the mental calculations felt impossibly distant. What remained was just this: a small pocket of calm carved out from the world's chaos. When the fish continued to ignore their bait, James showed no trace of frustration. Instead, he rose with easy purpose and began gathering dry branches from the nearby brush. He rearranged their small camp slightly, clearing a safe spot for a fire. Tu Diep joined him in cleaning the few small fish they'd managed to catch, her movements efficient but never hurried. Everything unfolded at its own natural pace, free from the pressure of schedules or expectations. Ly positioned herself near the pile of unlit kindling, watching James work. He reached over and gently guided her a bit closer to his side, then placed a flat piece of wood beneath her feet to keep them off the damp ground. These were tiny adjustments, the kind that might go unnoticed by a casual observer. But James performed them instinctively, as though there was no other way to be. Once the fire caught and began to burn steadily, warmth spread through their small circle. Ly leaned against James's arm, her weight barely noticeable but her trust absolute. James made small adjustments to her position, worried first that she might be too close to the flames, then concerned she might catch a chill from the breeze. He found the balance carefully, ensuring she was comfortable. Tu Diep watched this quiet choreography, feeling something shift inside her chest. In that moment, she understood with sudden clarity that happiness wasn't constructed from grand achievements or dramatic victories. It lived in scenes exactly like this one, where nothing needed to be proven, where strength didn't require demonstration, where success meant simply being present and attentive. As the fish finished cooking, their aroma drifted through the air, mixing with wood smoke and evening dampness. James divided the portions with care, handing the first piece to Ly before offering anything to Tu Diep. Ly ate with obvious pleasure, pausing between bites to announce that this felt like what weekends were supposed to be. James didn't respond aloud, but he understood deeply and completely. Days like this were precisely why he'd chosen a different path, why he'd walked away from things that once consumed him. As the sun began its gradual descent toward the horizon, the three of them sat in companionable silence. Words felt unnecessary now. The sound of moving water, the gentle breeze, the fire's fading warmth, these created a comfortable quiet that needed no filling. James looked at Tu Diep, then at Ly, and felt a sense of rightness settle over him. After everything, all the storms weathered, All the difficult choices made, this simple togetherness was more than sufficient. The silence stretched on, not awkward but earned. It was the kind of quiet that only arrives when people are comfortable enough not to feel obligated to fill every moment with speech. James shifted his weight slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze drifting across the stream's surface. The water continued its eternal journey, steady and impartial, flowing as it had long before their arrival and as it would long after their departure. There was something deeply reassuring in that continuity, something that anchored him to something larger than his own small concerns. Tu Diep adjusted the mat's edge and let herself recline slightly, drawing a fuller breath than she'd taken in what felt like weeks. She hadn't realized how much tension she'd been carrying until this moment, how constantly her mind usually raced ahead to the next task, the next obligation. Here, nothing waited for her except the present moment. No timetable to follow, no performance to maintain, just water sounds, lingering warmth, and the quiet presence of two people who mattered. Ly finished her portion and wiped her hands clumsily on her pants. James noticed immediately. Without comment, he reached for a cloth and gently cleaned her fingers, then her cheeks where grease had smudged. Ly giggled and squirmed in mock protest, but she didn't pull away. This kind of attention felt normal to her, as natural as breathing. It was simply how James was. "Uncle James," she said suddenly, her voice softer now than it had been earlier. "Can we come back here again someday?" James paused for just a moment, then nodded once. "Of course," he said simply. There was no hesitation, no hedging. To him, this wasn't a casual promise made to placate a child. It was a genuine commitment to protecting moments like this one, regardless of how complicated life might become. Tu Diep observed this exchange, her expression calm but thoughtful. She found herself remembering times when happiness had felt conditional, something to be postponed until certain achievements were unlocked, certain milestones crossed. Rest had seemed like a reward that required earning through sufficient effort. Sitting here now, she recognized how fundamentally wrong that framework had been. Happiness didn't need permission. It didn't need to wait for the right circumstances. James stood and walked to the stream's edge, crouching down to rinse his hands in the cool current. He splashed water on his face, letting it drip down slowly, and stayed there for a moment, lost in thought. Tu Diep didn't interrupt. She recognized that expression. It wasn't sadness. It was contemplation. In the past, James's mind had often been crowded with external pressure, others' expectations, responsibilities that felt heavier than they should have been. Success had once meant proving something, achieving something visible and undeniable. But standing by the stream now, those concerns felt like they belonged to a different person's life. His definition of success had transformed. It wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't performative. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. When James returned to the mat, Ly had started gathering small sticks, arranging them into haphazard piles. She proudly displayed her work, explaining that she was helping with cleanup. James crouched beside her and joined in, turning the task into an informal game. Tu Diep folded the mat and began repacking the basket. There was no urgency to leave, but there was a sense that the day had reached its natural conclusion. As they prepared to depart, Ly's foot caught on a loose stone and she stumbled slightly. James's hand shot out to steady her before she'd even fully lost balance. He didn't scold or fuss. He simply made sure she was unhurt, then adjusted her shoe where it had come loose. Ly looked up at him and smiled, completely unconcerned. Watching this, Tu Diep was reminded how trust gets built through consistency, through being present again and again, without needing acknowledgement or praise. The walk back felt qualitatively different from their arrival. The anticipation had mellowed into satisfaction. Ly grew quieter, occasionally skipping ahead before falling back into step. Tu Diep released her hand for a stretch, watching as James naturally adjusted his pace to stay close. He didn't call out instructions or warnings. He simply remained near, present, and watchful. As the path narrowed between taller trees, Tu Diep glanced at James. "You seem lighter today," she observed quietly. James smiled without immediately meeting her eyes. "I feel that way," he replied after a moment's consideration. "Like I don't need to be anywhere else." Tu Diep nodded. She understood precisely what he meant. For the first time in longer than she could remember, neither of them felt like they were running towards something or fleeing from something else. They were simply moving forward, together, without the weight of elsewhere pressing down on them. When they reached the tree line's edge, Ly yawned and rubbed at her eyes with the backs of her hands. James lifted her with easy strength, settling her against his shoulder. She rested her head there without protest, already halfway to sleep. Tu Diep watched the scene unfold, feeling her heart soften once more. There was something profoundly comforting about seeing James like this, not as someone striving, leading, or deciding, but simply as someone who remained steady. They paused briefly before stepping back onto the main path. James looked back one final time, taking in the quiet space they were leaving behind. He felt no need to carry anything away with him, no impulse to preserve it beyond memory. The experience itself was sufficient. As they walked away, the stream continued its patient journey, unchanged by their presence or absence. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Life would move forward, challenges would return, demanding days would come again. But now James understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. Peace wasn't something to be chased or earned. It was something to be chosen, protected, and returned to whenever the world grew too loud. Tu Diep walked beside him, her steps steady and sure. She didn't speak again, but her presence communicated everything that needed saying. She was there, not out of obligation, not fulfilling a role, but as a partner who understood the value of silence and simplicity. Ly slept soundly in James's arms as they disappeared down the path, their figures growing smaller until the trees swallowed them completely. And in that quiet departure, there was no dramatic conclusion, no sweeping revelation. Just the calm certainty that after everything they had weathered, this, walking together, unhurried and whole, was enough. This story follows James, Tu Diep, and little Ly during a quiet picnic by a small stream, where everyday moments reveal a deeper meaning of happiness. Away from noise and pressure, James shows care through simple actions, preparing food, teaching Ly how to fish, keeping her warm, and staying patient when things don't go as planned. Tu Diep supports everything silently, managing small tasks and offering emotional balance without needing attention. Their conversations are ordinary, yet full of warmth, trust, and understanding. As they fish, light a fire, and share a simple meal, the day becomes a reminder that peace doesn't come from achievement or status, but from presence and connection. In this calm setting, James realizes that after life's storms, true fulfillment is found in slowing down and choosing to stay together, right where they are.